Anything else?
All right, do you see the Connecticut Jewish Ledger? Yes, okay. All right, so I wanted to do something that I, it's going to be a little bit of a sad topic today, but hopefully come to an inspirational end. But I want to do something that you'll often hear in many classes, which everyone will say, you'll talk about whatever you're talking about, and then you'll say, well, there's one thing which we could do a whole class on that, but we can't, go into depth because we're in with a bit of our own topic. This time I actually want to do it, which is a point that was made as a side point in a different discussion. I want to be able to, try and expand upon. Let's see here, a second. On a topic what I call context matters, which is that sometimes in each of these classes, what we've done is we've quoted a particular issue, and we've talked about the responsa or sources behind it. And we just learn the topic. We learn what the halachic parameters are, what the issues that are raised, what are the questions, what are the answers. This time I want to only get to that at the end, because what I want to do is try and, like I said, context matters, to try and expand the context and understand the context that was going on in the background of the question, and that brings the question a whole new set of contours. And I think the best way to do that is to learn about the people that were involved in the question being asked. What was their life like? What was their history like? What was their life experience like? And that will, I think, expand our vision and our view of the of the topic that we're going to discuss. So if you can take a look, we're going to start in a really interesting order. The Connecticut Jewish Ledger here, you can see, Connecticut Jewish Ledger online is December to 2010, I'm sorry, December to 2010, 10 years ago or so. The obituary for a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Isaac Avigdor. I don't know if anybody know him. I don't know if Rabbi Green was in the East Coast in those years. I don't know if you were there. Were the Greens in the East Coast or already West in 2010? You're already back out West. Yeah, in San Francisco, yeah. But in West Hartford, in 2010, a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Isaac Avigdor passed away. I'll just read a little bit of his obituary. Rabbi Isaac Avigdor, who served as spiritual leader of the United Synagogues of Greater Hartford and West Hartford for half a century. He passed away on Wednesday, November 24th in Brooklyn. He had relocated to Brooklyn. He lived in Hartford for many years. He relocated in 2007. He was born in 1920 in Sons, Poland. He was the scion of a legendary rabbinic family with an unbroken chain of rabbis dating back to King David, can you believe? His father, Rabbi Dr. Jacob Avigdor, known in Poland, and I can ask somebody to give me the correct translation of the Rehovitzer. I think that's what it is. Somebody who knows how to read Polish can tell me the best way to pronounce that. His father became the rabbi of this shul called Chovevei Torah in Eastern Parkway, then later chief rabbi of Mexico City. And during the war, Isaac was separated from his parents and incarcerated at Mauthausen, the Kerry concentration camp, in which he was liberated on May 5th, 1945, together with some other people. He actually wrote a book called The Survivor of Thanksgiving, and he had a second bar mitzvah at age 83. After reuniting with his father in the United States, he built a life in New York City as executive director of a yeshiva and the director of National Apollo Mizrahi. Okay, they moved to Hartford, had a very meaningful life in New England. That's the obituary of Rabbi Isaac Avigdor. Now, we're actually not going to talk about Rabbi Isaac Avigdor. We're going to talk about his father, Rabbi Dr. Jacob Avigdor. But we found out about Rabbi Dr. Jacob Avigdor from the obituary of his son, who passed away in 2010. And the story that connected them is incredible. And so just keep this in your mind as we go through a little bit about Rabbi Dr. Jacob Avigdor. Okay, Rabbi Dr. Jacob Avigdor was born in Poland He was born actually in Galicia, which is now southeast Poland, although at that point I believe it was Austria. He was born in 1896. He got smicha, Rabbi Yaakov Avigdor, got smicha at 16 years old. 16 years old, he got ordination. And, which was unusual for the time, he then went to Krakow and got a PhD in philosophy. I don't think he got a PhD at 16, but after he got his rabbinic ordination, got a PhD in philosophy. He was named in the early part of the 20th century as the chief rabbi of, towns that I don't know that I'll pronounce, but Drohovich and Boroislav, which I think may be similar to Breslov, now which is in Ukraine, so I think that's Breslov. And he was there, the rabbi, until 1920, starting at 1920 until the Nazi occupation. But here is a really interesting tidbit about Rabbi Yaakov Avigdor. Rabbi Yaakov Avigdor would, as the rabbi of the town, officiate at many weddings. And one of the most famous weddings that he officiated in 1939 was a fellow by the name of Begun, first name Menachem, otherwise known as Menachem Begin. So this Rabbi Yaakov Avigdor in Europe officiated at the wedding of Rabbi Menachem Begin, and my dad just joined the Zoom, and my understanding is that our family actually somehow goes back to some of the Shtetlach and connected to Menachem Begin in those years. But what our story picks up, trying to research and learn a little bit about Rabbi Yaakov Avigdor, and I prepared some materials. Much of the materials are actually from a book by a woman by the name of Farbstein, who wrote about heroism and halachic analysis in the Holocaust. But Rabbi Yaakov Avigdor, our story with Rabbi Yaakov Avigdor starts at the beginning of the Holocaust. Now, he lost his majority of his family in the Holocaust, and he actually was taken to Buchenwald. But before he was taken, he writes, and we're taught about the terrible, terrible experiences he had in the ghetto. Look at this story from the terrors of the ghetto that just, it puts to the, just a concrete example of the horrors and the horrific experiences that we had. So booksellers stand for a common feature in the larger ghettos. Most of the books were sold to readers thirsty for books. Reuven ben Shem wrote in his diary on June 10th, 1941, on several occasions I had Jews who had not a cent for bread bargaining over the price of a book. However, we go down to here, as conditions worsened, books were also sold for reuse as paper. This was one manifestation of the harsh struggle for survival. Jewish books were now very inexpensive. This is due to the poverty of the Jewish population. After selling their household items, Jews finally also sell their holy books. On all street corners, one finds carriages full of holy books being sold for dirt cheap, literally for pennies. Now, this brings us to Rabbi Avigdor. Rabbi Avigdor, as we mentioned, was a chief rabbi, was a very, very prominent rabbi in that part of the world at the time. And he, in 1942, describes this horrific, horrific experience. Are you need me? 1 second. Look what he writes here. The mistreatment of religious books raised halachic questions, which are discussed in a meeting of the Lodz Rabbinical Board on March 18, 1942. One rabbi there described the trade in books for personal reuse and the condition of religious books in need of repair. But look at Rabbi Avigdor. Think about just the formative experience he has here in 1942 as a young man. He was born in 1896. On more than one occasion, can you believe this? I buried hundreds of slain martyrs with my own hand and placed in their graves packages of Torah scroll parchments that had been ripped to shreds and were rolling around outside. Can you believe it? Can you believe that? I said, he who avenges the honor of the Torah scrolls will also avenge the honor of the martyrs. But here is not the place to talk about this, neither the ink or paper would suffice. So this is our first meeting, so to speak, with Rabbi Yaakov Avigdor, and the horrors that were just the beginning of his experience in the 40s. He was taken to Buchenwald, and experience he had where he lost his entire family. He survived the war as the only member of his family. And if you look at the beginning of liberation, look at this experience. This is again from that book by Esther Farbstein. The initial holiday needs were also supplied by a bunch of rabbis who were there liberating the camp. Rabbi Yaakov Abrigdor recited a Shechianu after the war. And this is what he wrote. There were Jews who had not seen matzah in years. This is Pesach time. They emptied the package immediately. Then Rabbi Avigdor, who had been liberated a month before, got up. Even with his tortured body, he cut an impressive figure. And with eyes full of tears, he recited the blessing over the matzah aloud. This is the first Pesach after liberation. And before he recited another blessing, Shechianu. What did he explain? Rabbi Avigdor was saying this blessing, ordinarily recited the Pesach Seder, over his resumption of the observance of mitzvot as well. Can you believe this? He said, I have to make a Shechianu because for all the years in the war, I had been deprived of being able to do mitzvot. And again, this is, as they say, the first Pesach 1946 after the liberation, etched in many people's memories. And indeed, he became, after his liberation, he was one of the most active public leaders in the efforts to rescue and rehabilitate Jewish refugees in post-war Europe. And there's some really great information about him. But one of the things he needed to do was, after going through the horrors of the Holocaust, he needed to galvanize the entire Jewish world. So this is a copy of a letter he wrote describing his personal circumstances and the struggle, as they say, struggle to find a place. And the part of this letter was meant to be a fundraising letter, or a letter asking the world for resources. He had for several years, he was actually stayed in Europe and spent some years in Germany. And here's just a couple of pieces of translations. Here it's signed Yaakov Avigdor. Okay? Now look carefully, by the way, at this writing. You'll need it in a minute. He writes, in the name of God, out of nearly 7,000 rabbis in Poland, I am alone left alive. To my distress, I may be the only one. For more than 20 years, I was the chief rabbi of the rabbinical court of these cities. During that time, I published several valuable, important books about pilpul and halacha, which were lively expressed. He sort of gives his bona fides. I also studied science and taught myself secular subjects. He had a PhD in Lvov. He was distinguished in his generation. I had a reputation in our country as an excellent speaker, and I used a few languages, including English. You can actually see that here. He writes here, I was the great rabbis in Polania, Polania, even outside of Poland. I was personally an eyewitness to all of the deceitful acts of the accursed evildoers. I was on the Judenrat, in the Jewish quarter in the ghetto. I saw the destruction of the communities and extermination of the Jews. I was almost in all the camps in Germany. If I survived, it was a genuine miracle and wonder. So the awful and horrific experience of Rabbi Avigdor kind of gives you a sense of what the fire that he went through as part of the war. Now take a look at this. The shilas with which he dealt. It was a couple of years after the liberation, was sitting on a Beit Din. He was sitting on a Jewish court. And in this Jewish court, there were, this court in a city called, I have to just remember the name of the city here. I believe, here it is. It's Windesheim. That's where he lived. And he was on this rabbinical court. And one of the things they did was they dealt with the issues of agunot, meaning there were people who had survived, but they wanted to start their lives again, but they didn't know what the status of their spouse was, and therefore they were asking a question: could they get remarried? Again, just imagine the horrors here. Now look, and this is going to turn everything around. So there was a family who came to him, and he was asking, we're trying to figure out, can we rebuild, can we remarry? And they said, we have a document from a court witnessing the following. It witnesses a man had been separated his wife at the Selection in Auschwitz. He went to the right and she went to the left, and since then he has never heard nothing of her. So this letter is describing how this individual, and here you say he, right here, but Auschwitz, he was in Auschwitz, and we didn't know, and that was our testimony to prove that this man can, after this terrible war, can now remarry, because we can with great certainty say that Nebuch, his wife, was lost in the Holocaust. Now watch this. Ready? Look at the signature. Look very carefully at the signature. I'll zoom in here. Look very carefully on the signature on this letter of testimony about the terrible demise of this man's wife. Yitzchak Avigdor. So Rabbi Yaakov Avigdor, the one we've been talking about, who wrote all these letters, who was, saw these terrible horrors, is now sitting in a court, in a Beit Din. And a couple comes in front of him and they say, we have a document showing that Nebuch, this person's wife, has died. And who signed the document? Rabbi Avigdor's son. He didn't know his son had survived. His son had gone to Buchenwald, as we saw in the obituary. He had no idea his son had survived. And now, as he's sitting in a religious court in Germany after liberation, he gets a document where his son has signed. And that was the news he was given, that his son was actually alive. And immediately, his son was in Mauthausen, I'm sorry. Immediately, he saw this letter and launched on an incredible quest to find his son. And once they saw this letter, he realized his son was still alive. He was then able to reunite with his son. Take a look, remember, at this obituary. During the war, Avigdor was separated from his parents and incarcerated at the famous Mauthausen concentration camp, from which he was liberated May 5th, 1945. And after liberation, he founded this kibbutz, etc. But after reuniting with his father in the United States. So, you just read that obituary, say he reunited with his father. You don't know who his father was and how they reunited. Can you imagine? Rabbi Yaakov Avigdor is sitting on this Beit Din in Germany, and he sees this letter, realizes his son is alive, and then they actually are able to reunite. Okay? Now, that's the story of Rabbi Yaakov Avigdor. Just to give you a little bit more about his life here, let me see if I can get back to the letter. This is Rabbi Yaakov Avigdor right here. If you can see, I can try and zoom in again. That's Rabbi Yaakov Avigdor. I believe this was taken before the war. This is Rabbi Yaakov Avigdor. But then listen to what he did next. Okay, so he's reunited. He moved first to America, and in 1946, he went to America and he got a pulpit in Brooklyn. 6 years after he got the pulpit in Brooklyn, which is, by the way, where he reunited with his son, he was offered the job as the chief rabbi of Mexico. And he moved to Mexico City. He passed away in 1967. He was so beloved by the Mexican community. Look at a picture. In the cemetery in Mexico City, they made again, I'm going to try and zoom in here, if I can. You can see it. Let's see here. They made an entire ohel, entire building around his grave. You can see Rabino Dr. Jacobo Avigdor, Maran Hagon Yaakov Avigdor, Matovo Alecha, right? And then this is his tombstone, Rabino Dr. Jacobo Avigdor, and it says that Hamechune Dr. Avigdor, because he also had a PhD. So it says he was known, great rabbi, Moreno Harav Yaakov Bar Avraham Yisachar Ber Zatzal Hamechune. He was the great rabbi who was also known as Dr. Avigdor. And it says Shirat Chayav Be'emtza Nifsika. The song of his life was stopped in the middle. And that was a reference to the Holocaust that had this break in his life where he couldn't do mitzvot, he couldn't do these things. And they made this beautiful poem about him. This is on his grave. And then they also have a special gravestone right on the edge of his grave of all the books he wrote. Now, this is really interesting. Just imagine what kind of a person he was. All of these are all the books he wrote. He's a very prolific author. All of these books were written in Hebrew or Yiddish, but he also has Hametafizika b'Chochmat Yisrael, the metaphysics in Jewish thought, Ha'emunah v'Philosophia, faith and philosophy. Then he has Miktavim B'Halacha, Ayei Sofer, a bunch of different books, Machshava L'Lashon, and then he actually Al Isha Yehudit. And these were written in English. When he moved, he was so prolific. When he moved to America, many of his books were actually written in English. And then he moved to Mexico and Al Haluach Yehudi B'Sfaradit. Although these last 5 books, he was able to write. He was brilliant. He was so prolific. He was able to write them in Spanish. The last, and this is on his tombstone in Mexico City. He was able to write the last books of his life in Spanish. This is Rabino Dr. Jacobo Avigdor, Rabino de la Comunidad Israelita, Kihila Ashkenazi, the Ashkenazic community called Nidche Yisrael de Mexico, right? And it says here in Hebrew that he says, Rav Be'etvin, he was in the cities Tavra and Alaska in Europe, Rav Harashi V'av Beitin B'Dahovretz Barisel in Poland. After the destruction of Europe, he was a rabbi, a ram in the Yeshivat Maharshak in New York. He was a rabbi in the yeshiva, and then the rabbi of the Chovevei Torah synagogue in Brooklyn. And any Brooklynites can maybe tell me where that is. And then Rav Tepo Kihilat Kedoshah, Mexico Vagalil. He was the chief rabbi in Mexico. So, and this is he was so beloved by the Jewish community in Mexico that they erected this on his, there's sort of a big mausoleum, I don't know what the term is, mausoleum or whatever, around his grave, and this is the description of his life. So you can imagine just what a crazy, wild journey of life brought Rabbi Avigdor to Mexico. And the back and forth and coming to Brooklyn and starting a kehillah in Brooklyn and then moving to Mexico, and the disconnection from his son and how he was able to reunite with his son by seeing his son's signature on a piece of paper. I just want to show you for a second, really quick. It's just mind-boggling. If you look, this is the paper his son signed, right? Yitzchak Avigdor. And if you go back to the paper he signed, you see, let's see here. Let's see if I can find it here. Where his signature is almost identical to his son's signature. Here, Yaakov Avigdor, right here. It's interesting, and there's a lot more stories, a lot more research, Shoah research about him, and he was really one of the people who answered lots of these really tough questions. And he wrote about his intense loneliness after the Shoah, where people would ask him questions. He says, "Listen, I just don't have." He said, "I don't have my sfarim, I don't have my books to be able to research the answer to your question." He says, "A craftsman can't work without tools." As he said, a person can't work without books. But that was a bit of his life. Now, the reason why we did this is because the message I wanted to talk about today is what I call context matters, where you just see a book or you see a tshuva, you see a responsa, and you deal with the question as it is. What's the question? Today, I wanted to deal with one question, one topic, but that we tangentially raised last week, but with a whole new set of contours, because now you know the people involved and the backstory and the reason and the background involved. And with that, I want to get to the tshuva that I wanted to talk about today, right here. All right, can you see a Hebrew tshuva on the screen, a Hebrew text on the screen? Can you see that? Hopefully the screen share is working. You see the screen? Just give me a thumbs up if you can see the Hebrew text on the screen. All right, good. Okay. Actually, you know what? Maybe I'll stop for a second. and see if we can take questions. I'll unmute. Wanted to take any questions because this is it's just an amazing story of heartbreak and horror, but of really resilience that throughout the rest of the story. Okay, let's see. Mute off. Okay, so well, let's go back to the start. So last week we talked about the situation of what we call lifnei iver lo titein mechshol, the question of enabling averas, where we talked about the situation as it might apply to shul, and the idea that you have to not only be careful about yourself, but we have this need and requirement to focus on our care for others and our care for how we take mind of others' spiritual well-being. So in that context, there's a very interesting literature about this topic, written by Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. Moshe Feinstein wrote this letter, I believe, in the late 50s, I think 56 or 57. And it's in Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's Tshuvos, in his responsa, Yoredea Chelak Aleph Siman and Beit, chapter 52, volume 1. Okay? And just to look, Chaf Gimel Mar Cheshvan Tafshin Tet Zayin, which I believe is 1957. And who did he write this letter to? Malak Kvodo, which means the great honor, Yididi, my good friend, Harav Hagaon Hamafursam, the great famous rabbi, Moreno Rav Yaakov Avigdor Shlita, Hagaon av Beitin, Mexico. So he's writing this letter about this halachic question to the rabbi who is the Av Beitin, the chief rabbi in Mexico. And who is that? None other than our good, our topic, Rabbi Yaakov Avigdor. Okay, so the issue is the following question. And in order to understand the question, you need to understand a little bit of the background in terms of halacha. The halacha says that in the Torah, we are prohibited from eating milk and meat that are cooked together. If milk and meat are cooked together, it is prohibited to eat that, okay? Milk and meat that are cooked together. The rabbis expanded that, and made it a rule that not only you're not allowed to eat milk and meat that are cooked together, but you're not allowed to eat meat and milk at the same meal, which is why we have the same practice. The different communities have different hours. Do you wait 3 hours? Do you wait 2 hours? Do you wait half an hour? Do you wait 5 hours? Do you wait 6 hours? But what's clear is you can't do it at the same meal. You can't have a fleishik hamburger meal and the laws of kashrut have a glass of milk to wash it down. That is unequivocally prohibited in the laws of keeping kosher. However, it's important to note that is prohibited on a rabbinic law, right? The Torah law says you can't cook meat and milk together, benefit from meat and milk cooked together, eat meat and milk that are cooked together. However, the rabbis expanded that and said you also can't have meat and milk together at the same meal. Now listen to this shaila. The shaila that was posed by Rabbi Avigdor to his friend, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, was the following. Im litein hashgacha shelo yimkeru sham ma'achalot asirot, b'makom she'ei efshar limno otam milimkor ma'achalei chalav l'mi sherotzeh le'achalam acharei achilat basar, which means, are they allowed to have a restaurant, or can the rabbi give a hechsher to the restaurant with the caveat that the restaurant would be allowed to serve milk following a meat meal? It gives a little bit of more explanation here. All right, and here I'll read with you and translate. Bidvar hasport center. What's the sport center? Merkaz Sport, right? The sporting club. I know many JCCs have this kind of thing, that they have the major part of the JCC is these sports facilities, okay? And it's a Yehudi. It's a JCC, it's a communal sports center that's a Jewish sports center. Sheniftach in Mexico. It was opened in Mexico. And they have a cafeteria. And in the cafeteria, mevashlim sham, nevelot utrefot shkatzim urimasim. Pork, absolute, as they say, chazer treif. Totally non-kosher food, right? Nevelos utrefot shkatzim urimasim, the worst of treif food. Ukvod torato, And Rabbi Avigdor has a very interesting opportunity. Yachol lifol, he's able to arrange shiachshiru hamakom, that they will make the place kosher. And it'll be under the supervision of Rabbi Avigdor with a mashgiach, etc. And they won't cook food on Shabbos. With one condition. And let me give you the background. The owners of this cafeteria came to Rabbi Avigdor and they said, Rabbi, you have a choice. You can either let us alone, don't give us any kosher supervision whatsoever, but then I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to serve chazer treif. We're going to serve non-kosher food, shkatzim or matzah. We're just going to serve total treif in a Jewish sports center, in a Jewish communal facility. We're going to serve total treif. Or, Rabbi, you have option number 2. You can give us a hashgacha, can give us supervision, but you have to allow us to serve milk and meat together. And these were chachamim, so to speak, the owners of this cafeteria. They were, chap. They said, we know that the Torah allows you to do anything, or the Torah forbids eating milk and meat together. I'm sorry, cooking milk and meat together, or eating milk and meat there cooked together. But the rabbis are the one who said you shouldn't eat milk and meat at the same meal. Your rabbi waived that law. Give us a hechsher, but allow us to serve meat and milk together. And after somebody has a delicious burger, allow us to have the waitress offer them a milkshake or an ice cream. And that's a real quandary that Rabbi Avigdor was put in. On one hand, do I allow for my name, so to speak, my hechsher, my rabbinic approbation, to be put on a restaurant that serves meat and milk together, but at least when people eat there, they'll be eating kosher meat that wasn't cooked on Shabbos, frankly, kosher milk. They'll be eating, the all kosher ingredients. It's just that they will be violating this law of eating milk and meat at the same meal. But at least the ingredients they'll eat will be kosher, and the Jewish community center in Mexico City will have kosher food. Or do I say, no, I got to stand firm here. I don't have the right to just say, okay, this law of not eating milk together, meat and milk together, I'm just letting it go. It's either kosher or not kosher. Rabbinic law, Torah law, it's kosher or not kosher. And I can't give a hechsher to a non-kosher restaurant. And it's not kosher if you serve meat and milk at the same meal. Could you imagine, Pat's, Baruch Hashem, they're opening now. Could you imagine Pat's, being allowed to have a kosher hechsher with the waitress coming over or the waiter coming over and offering you a milkshake after you had your hamburger or your steak? Who could ever imagine such a thing? Could you imagine a kashrut organization allowing a hechsher for a restaurant that blatantly violates the laws of having milk and meat at the same meal? So he was stuck. On one hand, does he have the responsibility for the kashrut of the whole community, especially many who are not observant, who are going to come to the Jewish community center, and they're going to eat whatever is put in front of them. They're going to eat non-kosher meat. And does he have responsibility for that? Or does he say, you know what? I can't take responsibility for that. But I'm not going to stop, compromise my integrity by offering a hechsher to a non-kosher restaurant. And so he was deeply troubled by this question, but he was also deeply humbled, as he was we saw he was a great sage. He was, a beloved communal figure, but he also knew to ask. So he turned to his friend, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, and wrote a letter to Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, what should I do in this circumstance? Okay, so I'll read it again. Here it says, V'im lo yanichu otam zeh, einam rotzim klal lasod kashrut b'makom. If they don't allow me to give them essentially a stamp of approval, to allow them to serve meat and milk at the same meal, they're going to make the place not kosher at all. So Rabbi Avigdor wants to know my answer. Im lahanhig sham kashrut olo. Should he give the place a kashrut certification under these circumstances? Now, it's interesting that Rabbi Avigdor's history and his past is not addressed here in the Chuvah, and it wasn't brought up, but we know about his past and his history and the horrors that he went through and the trials and tribulation and thinking that his whole family was gone and only finding one son through a letter that he saw his son sign, the back and forth in his life. And he is now approaching this Shiloh. Now, can you imagine the different perspective he has on communal dynamics owing to his life experience, right? He sees the nature of community and the way of giving that psak and the way of interacting with community with a totally different lens than any of us could ever understand who haven't experienced that, life trials and tribulations. So it's really important when you see the question. It's not just a question. It's not just really an interesting, thought exercise or logic question. It fed in to the psyche and the mindset of Rabbi Avigdor. Now, what's really interesting, and again, we won't go in too depth because it's somewhat intricate, of the first, what's called Muskal Rishon, the first approach Rabbi Avigdor had, and again, it takes on so much more depth when you realize his life experience. The first approach, he says, was, let's think about this from a public policy standpoint. Essentially, what these cafeteria owners are doing are they're threatening me, right? They're coming with a threat. They're saying, either I'm threatening you if you don't relax your standards of what you'll allow and basically throw away thousands of years of Jewish tradition that you don't eat milk at the same meal, we're threatening you or that we're going to cause even worse averas to the Jewish community by serving them treif meat, pork, and which, again, as we still will see a little bit later, they would eat. So they were essentially threatening him. So Rabbi Feinstein says, Vihine vadai lahatir isur d'Rabbanan reshaim she'omrim she'im lo yatiru lahem ya'avru yisurim chamurim, which means the notion of basically canceling a Jewish law for, he calls them reshaim, for evildoers who threaten us, and they say that if we don't allow them to do this rabbinic prohibition, they're going to then violate much worse prohibitions. Yavur yisurim chamurim d'oraita. Even if they'll lose and leave religion altogether, we don't respond well to threats. And he says that Chatam Sofer, and he quotes a Gemara that has that same thing. And he says here, it appears to me, Shigam Ktov Torato Soberke. And it seems to me that you, Rabbi Avigdor, also have this initial thought. And again, the way that Rabbi Avigdor puts it in different ways, like, did I survive for this? Did I build a Jewish community out of nothing, out of ashes in Germany to find my son, and then to go to Brooklyn and build a community there, and now to serve you in Mexico, for us to finally have some safety and security in Mexico, which at that time in that part of the country they did have, to now start erasing Jewish tradition of eating milk and meat together, or potentially, or it's like, that's what I survived for, that's what I came for, to have the halacha essentially, under attack, under assault. After what I went through, that's what I have to deal with. I don't want to capitulate. I went through so much with my, integrity intact. I said shechianu on a matzah after leaving Buchenwald to allow me to be able to keep mitzvot. And now you're threatening me to try and get everybody to not keep the mitzvot with this, ultimatum? No dice. Not interested. And again, you just read this and you see it on one level, then you know his life experience and you see it on a whole different level. And it's a very powerful and, again, a heart-wrenching and emotional story that now brings a multi-layer to this question, which on the face of it, you would have just seen as just a question. Then it gets even, goes even further. However, Rav Moshe Feinstein, and I believe Rabbi Avigdor followed this advice. He says, you now got to go to a secondary level. That same life experience that made you indignant in this paragraph needs to soften your stance in the next paragraph. Zaval Bekan says, you know what? Eini roeh shum davar sheyimanu harabanim milanhig kashrut b'shvil sheyesh sham echad rasha sheyavor v'yimchor achilat basar machale chalav l'mitratzeh. He says, you know what? You take the high road. And he says, you need to think about the community. And you shouldn't stop availing people in the community of the necessity of kosher food just because of somebody who is going to do something that is not right by feeding them meat and milk at the same meal. I'm not giving you a hechsher on the people, and I don't like what they're doing, that they're offering milkshakes and ice cream at the end of a meat meal. I'm not saying that they're great tzaddikim. Ella, what is it? The rabbanim yiru v'yashkichu al hamakom shadvarim shemochrim yihu dvarim ksherim. The job of you as the rabbi is to make sure that all the food is kosher. Now, this is a very delicate line, because what he's saying is you're giving a hechsher on the food, but not on the procedures, which, by the way, is not the way that most kashrut supervisions now work. When you have a kashrut supervision on a restaurant, they're essentially going to say that the food is coming from kosher sources, and that the procedures of making and serving, etc., the food are coming with halachic bounds. But he says, all you're doing is making sure that you are feeding them kosher food. And by the way, kosher meat and kosher milk. And you're not going to make, and they're not going to cook on Shabbos. But there are going to be people that are going to sell, and there are people who will buy. They're going to order a milkshake after their hamburger. Remember, this connects to what we were talking about. Even though this is a problem for the fellow at the store to sell a milkshake to somebody who just ate a hamburger, because that's a problem of lifnei iver, right? To enable somebody to do an avera. Ein harabanim achra'im lezeh. The rabbis are not responsible for this. Kevan she'efshar limchot, because as you clearly say, you can't stop it. And he says, Kamo she'ein achra'im al ma she'osim b'beitam. Right? Am I going into anybody's house and telling them after they have their meatloaf, don't go in the fridge and get a cup of milk? I'm not going into somebody's house and telling them that. And that's not a responsibility that I, as a communal figure or rabbi, have. And therefore, he says, Lo nireh klal she'rabbanim mekilim b'zeh. It's not, doesn't look so much that you guys are being lenient. V'lachein vadai davar gadol yaseh kvod torato shinegu sham kashrut b'mashgiach. It is the right thing to do to make sure you do send a mashgiach there, and you do allow and make certain that the food there is kosher. V'zchut gadol ulfot she'alfei yatzil alfei nefashot mimachalot asurot. Because what are you doing? You're at the end of the day, you're saving Jews from doing an avera. Because of your act of creating some sort of presence in this cafeteria, that you are doing something good, that you're allowing them to not, that most of the people will now eat kosher. Again, and you're trying, and you're trying to stop people as much as you can, that they don't violate prohibitions. That's also mitzvah gedolah, right? You're helping them not violate the prohibitions of eating terrible treif food. And by the way, he adds, but Prat, especially since many of the people in Mexico City were not religious, it's stopping a lot of people. A lot of people who just, they don't know the laws. They're like you said, we talked about last, we have to try and make sure that they stop and don't do so many averot. So look at what I call evolution of this thought process. It starts with him saying, I don't respond well to threats. Don't threaten me. You make me cancel this law so I can follow that law. To now thinking more communally. What can I do to take care of my people? And if you think about it, knowing the story of Rabbi Yaakov Avigdor, and by the way, this was the opinion Rabbi Moshe Feinstein wrote about to Rabbi Avigdor, but he mentioned that Rabbi Avigdor concurred with him, saying, I gotta now think that same experience. You know what? I can obviously make sure to stand for my integrity and do whatever procedures I can to make sure I follow and I'm comfortable with the action that I give, which is a very delicate thing, especially in that community. However, I've got to realize the answer to my question was, look what we survived. Look what we went through. And we still have a community and we need to take care of them. And I think that's a really, just again, knowing his story, a really beautiful, inspirational aspect of this halakha. Where at the end of the day, he did give the hefsher because he says the value that goes above and beyond everyone is making sure that I think and I care about people's spiritual well-being. And the best way to do that is make sure that they have access to kosher food. And that to the extent I can, again, with a heavy heart and with difficulty and with all sorts of different things which you could agree with or disagree with, I want to make sure that they're able to have access to whatever they can, even though I'm not happy with some of the way that things are going on and the way the food is being served. But I can help them and care about them in that way. So, like I said, last week we just talked about this one line, that you can't put a stumbling block before a blind person. We gave the background to what it was. We gave some examples about not giving bad advice and not giving, enabling an avera. And we have this one line, and that came up in this tshuva, in this question, are you enabling an avera? Are you enabling an enabler or an avera? All these nuances that come into this question that were dealt with by Rabbi Avigdor. But as you say, sometimes you just see the question, but you now see what Rabbi Avigdor was dealing with, was wrestling with his personal experience and the emotions that had brought him to that place and that time in the 50s in Mexico City. And it brings all these new contours to the way that he dealt with this issue. So I think what ended up, carrying the day, and he realized that this question is written with a totally different lens when you know about his history. You see the values and the struggles he was having, and some of that history bring up different emotions within him as you read through the tshuva, and end up the answer coming saying, how do I take care of my people the best? And I think that resiliency and that overarching value of making sure that you give care and rising above the trials and tribulations, the unimaginable horror that we described through the first part of the shir, ends up bringing that extra level of inspiration to the care and kavod that he had to make sure he took care of his community, through his rabbinate in Mexico. And again, we saw how much he was beloved by the community, probably because he took all that life experience and expressed it in love in the community, like we see in this tshuva. So I think that's just a really fascinating story that leads to fascinating halakha. I guess the halakha, the inspiration, and we'll open it up if people want to ask questions. Let's see here. Yeah. Okay. Yes. All right, Suzanne. I'm gonna unmute. I'm gonna mute, and then I'll open up for Suzanne. Give me a second. Suzanne, can you unmute yourself? There we go. Go ahead.
If you're not a rabbi in a very machmira situation and congregation. This situation is a total, for a modern person, or maybe modern Orthodox, I don't know, or maybe even anything less than that. It's a very, just fair and very logical and question, because you do it for the community.
Yeah.
But the people do themselves later not, and you can handle it when you deal with a meaty thing. You can only bring the milky on disposables and so on and so on. You can handle it, okay? The thing is, I know how many communities split because of a question.
Yeah.
And I know that in Hungary, one of the big situation in the time of Khatam Soferes, and my family was involved in that, was being able to marry in the synagogue instead of in the courtyard.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, there are a lot of these important communal issues.
Communities split and rabbis left.
Yeah, and he didn't want that to happen.
There should be sometimes a little bit of a question: what is the outcome?
Yeah, what do you mean the outcome here? They did give the hechsher. They did give the hechsher here. Yeah. Okay. Other questions people have.
And there's another thing I wanted to say.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
The sport club in every South American city is the Jewish community club.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's the cultural center, and it's very
yeah.